in the zone, all the moments, energy components that live and follow. I no problem, so birthday bonus. Everything green, and I can see my breath, so I know I'm breathing, but I got no.
Welcome to the Audi Garage. In these videos, I'll take you along for a week of my life in the shop and see what interesting and unique things I might get up to. So make sure to stick around and see what I get up to this week. Last video, I had talked about a car that got dropped off in the evening, and this is what we have. It's a B6 1.8T 5-speed. This has a Dominate tune on it, a few mods. It has a KO4 turbo, some really nice paint detailing done by Bold Detailing out of Elmira. He's a good kid. So the issue was weeks ago there had been a slight grind into third gear. So I had picked up a new transmission, basically waiting for this moment, and on the weekend basically the whole transmission grenaded and it's barely able to get into first, second, third. Fourth and fifth kind of work, but it's pretty gnarly. So I've already dropped the original transmission. The clutch looks good. I had installed that. A single mass Bully or South Bend, I can't remember exactly what it was, but that clutch still looks good, so I'm pretty confident that it is a transmission problem. So I have a replacement 5-speed sitting here. I will need to swap out this for the speed sensor, but everything else should bolt up perfectly fine. This is a nice low kilometer unit, so hopefully it'll last for a long time unless it gets driven super aggressively. I've also finally finished up the Miata. I put in a new master cylinder. Bled that system, was kind of a pain, not like most of the Audis and Volkswagens I dealt with, so that just took a long time. And then I still need to take it for a test drive to 100% confirm everything's good, but I'll do that before the end of the night and possibly get this in before the end of the day as well. Tomorrow is another dyno day, so I'll hopefully do a better job filming this time and get some good information and runs while we're there. So today I'm going to start off by throwing the replacement trans in. See, it's all nicely cleaned up compared to the dirty old one. I did have to swap over the speed sensor, so I swapped that over from here. There's just a plug on this one. And then I just need to swap over the exhaust hanger and then take off the heat shield to make it easier to put the downpipe back on. And then we should be good to go. So basically probably update you when this is back in the car and together. So while I was editing this video, I noticed there was a large gap in information and footage from finishing up this job, and I wanted to explain what happened. So unbeknownst to me, because I was told this transmission was from the same year as the B6 that it was going into, the output flanges actually turned out to be a different size. The ones in the car, I believe, were larger. So the first thing I had to do, and I realized this only after I put the transmission up, was use jack screws to pull out the flanges. They came out pretty easy. It wasn't that big of a deal. So I put them all together. Axles fit and everything was good. And I know I had mentioned the speed sensor that I changed on this side. Also unbeknownst to me, something I hadn't dealt with before, is that speed sensor actually needs a magnetic ring that's inside of this casing. So after I swapped the axle shafts, I took it for a drive and the speedometer wasn't working. So I actually had to remove this axle flange again, pull off this side case on this transmission and the new one that I swapped in, and put the magnetic ring onto the new transmission. So everything was good after that, and the job did work out fine. But for future reference, if you're ever doing a swap like this, definitely measure the inside of the axle cups, even if you've been told it's the same year. And as well, if you do need to swap over the speed sensor, there is that magnetic ring that you will have to swap. It won't just be plug and play. So once I had finished that B6 trans swap, I had started to try to finish up the final touches on the V8 car to make sure it would be ready for the dyno day. Unfortunately, everything was fighting against me. Everything from getting it emissions tested so I could legally do some testing on the road, to having my trailer canceled at the very last minute by the rental company. There was just no way that I was going to be able to get it to the dyno safely and running in decent condition. So at this point, I put that on the back burner and just prepared for the dyno day. And now I have some footage of a few of the 2.7 cars, all stage 3 cars, that ran. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about the 3 cars, one at a time. I'll show a dyno run, and then I'll bring up the dyno sheet and talk about the numbers. So the first car is Adam's 2.7 swapped B6. He's done a really good job on this. I believe he's done all the mechanical work himself, and Bichet Performance over in the Netherlands or Sweden is doing the tune on it. He's running a Franken Turbo mixed flow setup. Right now, they're running at the limit of the 2.5 bar map sensor that's in the car, so it's at about 22.5 psi. And they're hoping to turn that up in the future. He's also running ER side mount intercoolers, but no meth, and obviously on 94 octane gas. So as you can see, his first run was obviously the best before the heat silk kicked in, just shy of 400 wheel horsepower with 420 foot-pounds of torque. Unfortunately, it did heat soak pretty bad, losing almost 50 wheel horsepower by the third run and about 40 foot-pounds of torque. It'll be really interesting to see once they turn this car up what it ends up putting out. I'm sure we'll see it again at the Spring Dyno Day, which if you are local, make sure to check out when I post for that in the future. The next Stage 3 2.7 car is Art's JHM RS6 RS swapped Stage 3 car. I personally built this car from absolute bone stock to almost every single bolt-on imaginable. This one was tuned by Blake Beetle. He's also running AWE side mount intercoolers and basically all the other basics that you could imagine on the car, along with all of the drivetrain and suspension modifications as well. As you can see on the dyno chart, pay attention to the bottom numbers. Unfortunately, I just have an engine power graph for this one, but at the bottom it has the wheel horsepower numbers. So for the first run, we made 440 wheel horsepower with 452 foot-pounds of torque, both coming in around 5,100 RPM. Still did have a considerable amount of heat soak on this one by the third run, about 50 horsepower as well. This car doesn't have meth, so that is a very big issue when running these cars on the dyno, in my experience. This chart does show a drop-off in power after it peaks, but on the street, it definitely doesn't feel that way. It feels like it keeps pulling with a flat curve, so there might be some intervention in the computer or something going on in that scenario. When you don't have a tuner tuning on the dyno, these issues can come up because doing street logs and refining from there doesn't always expose certain things that happen in a super controlled environment. Overall, this car is running super well and Art's super happy with it, and it's definitely a lot to handle on the street. So the last car is obviously Christian's from Dominate Performance. This is the car that we've both been putting a lot of work into to make as good as we can with multiple dyno runs. I think we had up to 40 runs on what people would consider all Chinese parts. So that's kind of the key to this build. We went full out on the most budget-friendly parts that you can imagine that people usually don't think can make power. So we have excess power intercoolers, we have Chinese turbos, RS6 hybrids. Nothing is super fancy. The only thing that is decently extra is the meth kit. It is an 034 plug-and-play kit, which I highly recommend. It makes a world of difference, especially with heat soak. So as you can see, we made 467 wheel horsepower. This was down a little bit from the 480 that we made the week before on the dyno, but we still came in at 453 foot-pounds of torque, and as you can see, a very smooth curve. This is the same smoothing as all the other graphs as well. The biggest point to notice in these graphs is you can see our losses are very, very minimal, and that's due strictly to the meth injection. Even with super cheap $300 intercoolers, we can still manage to keep consistent power even on a dyno with just a single fan in the front. So overall, the dyno day was a super big success. I had a ton of fun. A lot of people came out. It was cool to talk to some new faces. So if you guys were there, it's you guys that make it possible and worthwhile to run these days. And especially to the guys that have the balls to run their car on the dyno and aren't afraid of putting down a number because they've said their car makes X amount of horsepower, but you know, it probably will never make that horsepower, so they're too afraid to put it on a dyno. It's you guys that are the real people that make this possible. So thanks again to everyone that showed up. I appreciate it. I appreciate you guys a lot. And I'll definitely continue doing this in the future because it helps everyone. We're able to collect a lot of good knowledge and apply it to all the cars that each and every one of us is building, whether it's me or you. So thanks again, guys. Well, yesterday was a blast at the dyno day. Super successful. We pulled awesome numbers on the Nagaro RS6 RS car, and Christian pulled some awesome numbers on his RS6 RS car. So only more to come from those. We're going to continue on with those builds. They're going to keep evolving and hopefully keep putting down more power and really pushing the limits of the stock block. So like I said, that's it for this week. So make sure to subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Make sure to leave me a like if you liked the video. And if you have any comments or suggestions, make sure to throw them down below and I'll definitely read them. But like always, I'll see you guys in the next one.